This has a chance to be an absolutely gorgeous football game. The uniform combinations are out of this world. I can't wait to see what they go with. The Ole Miss Rebels and the Penn State Nittany Lions in the Peach Bowl in the New Year's Six. This thing Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, and I'm likely the only person that you're going to hear from today that has had an office in the Manning Center at Ole Miss and have worked in the national media at Yahoo Sports. Thank you very much for joining us. Today on the show, Ole Miss gets their New Year's Six bowl game with the Peach Bowl, with the Penn State Nittany Lions, and the importance of winning the game is going to be the story this year. As I mentioned, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and YouTube. Thanks very much for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers that make the show what it is. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Now, this is an absolutely massive football game for the Ole Miss Rebels. And, we all can talk about it, but this is going to be Ole Miss deserved a New Year's Six game. And we were worried about that. And we're going to talk in the next segment how this was just an unlikely path for Ole Miss to the New Year's Six. But with Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl, this turned out to be the perfect location for Ole Miss. We talked about the Cotton Bowl. We talked about matchups with potentially Texas and all these sexy matchups out there. We talked about what could benefit Ole Miss the most. And we settled on this fact that if Ole Miss needs to win their bowl game, and it doesn't matter which bowl they're in, winning the game is going to be paramount for the Ole Miss Rebels in this football game. And it would have been the case even if they'd have went to the Citrus Bowl. Just win the game. Get that 11th win. That is where momentum is. That is where you kind of can make your bones. Get that 11th win. But we talked about how it was going to be important with the win to get some little bit of leeway. So you kind of needed to beat a national brand. And Iowa, as great as it is, Ole Miss would have went into that game as a 13-point favorite. They just would have. I think Brett Murphy at the Action Network had him at 13 points favorite in that game. Whenever they were saying that Ole Miss was like the bona fide choice to get into the Citrus Bowl in January. And that would have been fine. But if Ole Miss would have won that game, they're probably 8th or 9th. If you look at national perception, if you win your bowl game, you get a bump depending on who it is. It's just the way it works. If you look at it, Ole Miss beat Texas Tech in the Cotton Bowl in 2008. Ole Miss came into the 2009 season ranked 3rd or 4th in the country because of what was coming back. That narrative story that Ole Miss is going to take during the offseason is only going to be possible if Ole Miss wins the bowl game. Ole Miss needs to win the bowl game. And Penn State's a good team, okay? Understand that they struggle a little bit offensively, but their defense is salty. This is a Manny Diaz defense. We went against Manny Diaz when he was at Mississippi State. They're attacking. They flow very hard. All of that stuff is what Penn State does. They have a couple of really good defensive ends. They're really nice at stopping the run. They're a top 5 defense in the country. Now, they're from the Big Ten, which most of the good teams play defense and run the football because of the weather, but Penn State does that. So we're going to look at what Penn State does really well as this gets closer to the bowl game, because we're about 4 weeks out from that. We got a lot of stuff we're going to get on. We're going to have crossovers with the Locked On Nittany Lions host, all of that stuff. We'll get to that in due time. But as for right now, we talk about how much this means to Ole Miss. This is Ole Miss's 4th New Year's Six bowl game in the 10-year run of the New Year's Six being a thing. 40% of the time, even this is with probation in the middle, Ole Miss played one of these bowl games. It's going to be 2 Peach Bowls and 2 Sugar Bowls done by 2 different head coaches. And the reason I bring this up is where Ole Miss is as a program, where Ole Miss came from and where Ole Miss is. And 4 New Year's Six bowl games is different for a program that prior to the New Year's Six, I think 2014 was really the coming onto the scene year for Ole Miss football. Prior to that, it was a slog. It was a middling program. It was a situation where Ole Miss went to the Cotton Bowl, but that's when the Cotton Bowl was taking 8-4 teams, if that makes sense. So this is a big deal for Ole Miss football. I think I saw a tweet. I can't verify its accuracy, but I'm going to assume that it is. If you look at the teams that played in the New Year's Six in the SEC, the leader is Alabama with 9 out of 10. Second is Georgia with 7 out of 10. And third is Ole Miss with 4 out of 10. Ole Miss over the last 10 years has been the third best team in the Southeastern Conference. It's not even close. And this game is important for momentum. Beating Penn State and beating a name brand. And right now, we'll talk about the lines coming in, but Penn State's a slight favorite. And I've even seen some where Ole Miss is a slight favorite. The line's kind of all over the place. That's the reason we're kind of not pushing them out at this moment, but they're going to settle over the next couple of days. This is a named team that will allow, with a victory, Ole Miss might be 5th in the country preseason next year. And everybody's like, preseason rankings don't mean anything, Steve, or the AP poll doesn't mean anything, Steve. No, but it starts a narrative. And that narrative is important because this playoff worked out the way it did in the most unlikely of ways. The most unlikely of ways. But everybody knows the story that was being told in September. SEC is down. Pac-12 is the magic conference. Pac-12 should win the Heisman. They should all get in the playoffs. Is the Colorado Buffaloes the best offense since 2019, not Miami? That is the narrative that was being pushed out in September. Now, we all know after the season was over, the SEC was just as powerful as they normally are, just as good as they normally are. And they finished with 5 of the top 13 or something like that, and 7 out of the top 13 or top 15 if you count Texas and Oklahoma. So literally half of the top 15 or top 14 or whatever SEC schools in 2024. So you need to establish that narrative early into 2024, the 12-team playoff, the whole 9 yards. This is the season that's kind of for all the marbles. It just is. Ole Miss is in a position to make a run to potentially host a 2024 12-team college football playoff game. And the moment the Egg Bowl ended, that became the story. So what Penn State is a way to build that momentum, to increase that narrative, to where Ole Miss is the team on everybody's lips going into the season in 2024. It's a major thing. Everybody's going to talk about talk is cheap and you want to prove it on the field and all of that stuff. But that's not the way that things work. If that was the way that things worked, Florida State would be in the playoffs right now instead of Alabama, who has all of the benefit of the doubt, who was the team that had 4- and 5-star players that took down the mighty Georgia Bulldogs. But them taking them down helped Ole Miss get into the NY6. And if you look at the NY6, we'll talk about the games. 5 teams from the SEC, 5 teams from the Big Ten from 2024. If you look at teams that are in the conference next year, 5 and 5. It's only Liberty and Florida State that even make it into the NY6. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But I do want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. But I do want to tell you, first of all, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day. We're just getting started. The path to the New Year's Six was crazy and involved one of the most unlikely ways. We'll talk about that in just a second. But right now, Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business and you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview, that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. If you hire the right person, quality candidates, you get those candidates. It's just like hiring a college football coach. If you hire the right one, they're going to have you on the discussion for the 12-team playoff or for the NY6. If you hire the wrong one, you're going to be doing this again in 3 years. The difference is if you do this in the real world and you hire the wrong person, in 3 weeks, you're going to be doing this again. And that's energy that's better spent on other aspects of your job. LinkedIn just isn't just another job board. It has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many qualified candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats, and that might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They've even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, that making the process even easier and quicker. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Ole Miss gets the Penn State Nittany Lions in the Peach Bowl, and that is potentially the best non-playoff game that is scheduled this year. This is two teams that have almost identical resumes in losses. They've won the games that they were supposed to win. This is a matchup of two completely evenly matched teams. We'll tell you some early lines whenever we get to that in the third segment, but it's going to be interesting. You have one team that has an absolutely explosive offense. You have another team that's really good at getting after the quarterback, has a really good defense. You have one team that has Quinshon Judkins. You have another team that has two really good running backs. You have a chance for this Penn State Ole Miss game to be really, really entertaining. And like I said in the first segment, just win the game. But getting to an NY6 game, getting to this New Year's 6 game was the most unlikely thing that Ole Miss football could have had this whole bowl season. It was one of those situations where Tuesday and Wednesday last week, we were all fighting with Missouri fans. Everybody remembers that. Even had a crossover on Thursday with the Locked On Mizzou site. You know, we both got in. It all worked out. It's all good. And John Miller from Locked On Mizzou is like, why aren't you fighting with Penn State? And he's absolutely true. I just didn't think that they would not take an extra Big Ten team, instead take an SEC team. I didn't think that was possible. And honestly, it wasn't, because Liberty or Tulane or all that, and even with Tulane losing, once Tulane lost, I was like, man, that's going to knock them out of the rankings. That's one of Ole Miss's ranked wins. That's going to hurt the resume that's up to this point has been pretty stellar. But whenever that happened, it was kind of over. And then Texas boat raced their opponent, and it was like, okay, that's interesting, because everybody heard that maybe Texas versus Ole Miss in the Cotton Bowl was the game to watch. Everybody heard that. Everybody thought the Peach Bowl was going to get the G5 game, and we all assumed it was going to be Tulane. And everybody assumed that, you know, Ole Miss was going to have a hard row to hoe. And it got to the point on Saturday evening that Ole Miss's best shot was the most unlikely of paths to the NY6 for any school. And that was the number 4 team in the college football playoff that is playing a conference championship game, had to win that game, become the ACC champions as the number 4 team, and not make the playoffs. That was Ole Miss's path. As good of a team as Florida State has been all year, you could see that Florida State was probably going to win that game, but you didn't have faith that the committee would do the things necessary to get Ole Miss into the tournament. Or not the tournament, the NY6. And you need that. It kind of felt like Doctor Strange in Avengers Infinity War or Endgame, whichever one it is, to where he's doing the time travel thing and is like, hey, I looked at like 14 million different possibilities and there's only one that we win. And this was kind of like that, because it got to the point where the only way that Ole Miss could go to the playoff is if Louisville didn't. I know there was some late freaking out about whether Oklahoma would jump them, but I didn't believe that at all too much. But Florida State had to beat Louisville to knock them out, no ACC championship, no NY6 bowl games, and not make the playoff. So it became interesting. It became a very far-fetched thing after the Texas game. And then Alabama beat Georgia, which to me, at first, I was like, oh, that's kind of bad for us. And that wasn't because Georgia was going to be in. That was because Alabama was 8th, and they needed to go to 4th. And then Oregon had gotten beat on Friday, and Ohio State, even though they were ranked where they were never going to make it. It became a story of Alabama versus Florida State. And I honestly believe, and I will take this honestly to my grave believing this, there was not a world where Florida State was going to beat an SEC champion, and especially not Alabama. That wasn't going to happen. All of the stuff that we complain about within the conference, Florida State just found out a national version of it. Alabama was going to win that 10 times out of 10. And it became a situation where Florida State should have canceled their watch party, because Alabama was not going to be left out of the college football playoff. Now, I think that they got these 12 teams right. They got this 100% correct, okay? So what I'm about to say, don't take that a different way. They got this 100% right. But it's completely crappy for Florida State. And I completely feel sorry for Florida State, because it is off of a player injury that they're not there. And now the precedent has been set for a one-loss SEC team to go in against an undefeated ACC team. You basically just relegated the ACC to Tier 2 status. And there's 3 conferences that are now the big boys. That's the Big 12, the SEC, and the Big 10. And if you look at the NY6, and there's 10 teams in there that are either SEC or Big 10 in 2024, that's not exactly surprising. So it should be really interesting. But this path to get to the game, absolutely unlikely. It wasn't the way. And honestly, you go back 2 weeks when Ole Miss fans just started really living and dying with other games, trying to get to this New Year's 6 platform. You had the 4th and 17 against from Florida against Missouri. You had Alabama with 4th and goal from the 31. You had upsets, and just weird stuff happens. And this year, like every other single year, it just worked out. And I'm not going to be upset that the ACC got left out, that Florida State got left out. Like I said, I have empathy for the players. I know it sucks. It absolutely is terrible. But before I take a break, I do need to say, in 2021, maybe, when Texas and Oklahoma let everybody know that they were going to the SEC, the Big Ten coalesced a group of the Pac-12 and the ACC together and formed the alliance. That alliance, the legacy of that alliance, now that it's been disbanded and it's done, these are the 2 things that got done. First of all, UCLA and USC, along with Oregon and Washington, got poached. They basically killed the Pac-12. Shamelessly, by the way. Nobody talks about that. But they absolutely killed the Pac-12. And that alliance got the ACC involved to delay the 12-team playoff that was slated to begin in 2023. If that 12-team playoff would have been allowed to exist, Florida State would have opened up with this. This is what it would have looked like this year if that alliance didn't happen. Florida State would have been able to celebrate this year with a home game, home playoff game versus Liberty before getting Alabama. You could celebrate it. You get the reward for the kids, the whole 9 yards. But no, you were scared. You were upset with the big bad SEC, and you decided to try and figure out a way to catch up. And that's what this was for the Big Ten, a way for them to try and make up ground. Them and Fox came up with this scheme. If you look at this is the way it would plan. Although next year, I think you would see Ole Miss at 10 and Penn State at 11, so you didn't have rematches of Ohio State and Georgia. But other than that, it was about there. Oregon and Missouri, Florida State and Liberty, Ole Miss, Ohio State, and Penn State at Georgia is the way I think it would go for the right to play in that top four. It would all been worked out. It would all been fantastic. It was because of the selfishness of the Big Ten, the Pac-12, and the ACC that all of this is happening, and they deserve all the blame for Penn State or for Florida State not making it into the tournament or the NY6 or the tournament. Period. It's not the SEC's fault. It's not Texas and Oklahoma. They wanted to provide opportunities for everybody. It was the conference that was scared that they were being left, that was panicking, that made a couple of hasty decisions that ended up costing Florida State the playoff. And they'll likely cost them their existence in the ACC, because I think them and Clemson after this are gone because of that undefeated team getting left out of the playoffs situation. Anyway, still more to come on Locked On Ole Miss, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Why the Peach Bowl is the perfect spot for Ole Miss. And we look at early lines around the NY6 and around the SEC and stuff like that. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers to stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, and over-unders as well. So that is pretty cool indeed. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, it's an official partner of the NFL. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day, and shout out to the Everydayers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. Plus, for your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. Be part of history. Now, this Peach Bowl was absolutely perfect for Ole Miss. This is a situation to where I think I know what's going on, and then they do something, I guess, that I just didn't think was probable, and I was like, oh, I see it now. And this Ole Miss Penn State game is probably the best non-playoff game. It's in Atlanta, close to the Ole Miss fan base. Penn State travels very well. It's going to be an aesthetically beautiful football game. The line's going to be 5 points either direction on it. And we'll see opt-outs and things like that. But Ole Miss has a chance to be pretty salty in this football game. I think that Ole Miss getting into this New Year's Six is absolutely massive. And winning this game catapults you to where if you beat Iowa in the Citrus Bowl, you catapult to 9 at the start of next season. Beat Penn State, you're probably going to catapult to 5, depending on what goes on and things like that. But that narrative is going to change, and everybody's going to talk about the players that Ole Miss has coming back. This Peach Bowl is the start of momentum, and it's going to be very, very important as it goes on. Now, if you look at other bowl games, the lines from FanDuel, Penn State right now, it opened at a 3.5-point favorite on FanDuel. Auburn is a 2.5-point favorite over Maryland in the Music City Bowl. Georgia in the Orange Bowl, a 14-point favorite. LSU favored by 10.5 points. Tennessee in the Citrus Bowl. Tennessee got the Citrus, by the way. Congratulations. 7-point favorite over Iowa. Of course, a lot of that was the fact that LSU was there last year. Alabama is a 1.5 underdog to Michigan in the playoff. And I was like, I'm laughing at that one because it feels like somebody's going to learn about yummy rat poison in that football game for sure. And if you look at what Missouri is, I'm trying to find the Missouri line right now. Missouri is a 6.5-point underdog to the Ohio State Buckeyes as well. These are the early opening lines. And like I said, they're going to fluctuate a little bit because there's so many unknowns when it comes to bowl games, but it's going to be a pretty big deal. But Ole Miss is against Penn State in the Peach Bowl, December 30th at 11 a.m. Central Time. It's an 11 o'clock game, but the Citrus Bowl, by the way, would be at noon. So it would have been an early morning game regardless. The Peach Bowl against Penn State, it just makes sense. It's the first ever meeting between Ole Miss and Penn State. An Ole Miss Big Ten game is always fun. We remember the last time, though, that Ole Miss had one of these games. Ole Miss needs to focus. But in 1990, Ole Miss went to the Gator Bowl and played that Michigan team that lost 2 or 3 games. They probably were a national championship level team. They lost 2 or 3 games unexpectedly, ended up in that Gator Bowl, and they just completely outclassed Ole Miss that day. This will be an Ole Miss chance to kind of make up for that against the Big Ten and get ready to potentially be a top 5 team in 2024. There's portal stuff. There's all kinds of stuff that's going to go on. That is going to be important for Ole Miss moving forward to the 2024 12-team playoff. This bowl win will help with the narrative to establish momentum to get you set up for the beginning of the 12-team 2024 college football playoff run. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day as the transfer portal opens today. Right now, it is open, and we will look at some of the players that are fits at what Ole Miss does. We'll start to talk about that. And for your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today and subscribe on YouTube to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. For those of you on YouTube, we'll send you there right now. Hotty toddy.